Okay, let's start the webinar. You're very welcome to this third webinar on GEM national reports. I'm just going to immediately introduce today's speakers before talking briefly about what GEM is and how we work very briefly. But to introduce myself, I'm Aileen Ionescu-Somers. I am the Executive Director of Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, and I will be facilitating the conversation here today. We're also joined by Professor Monica Rio Nevado de Zelaya. She comes from GEM, she represents GEM Guatemala and is the Dean of the School of Economic Sciences at the Universidad Francisco Marroquín. And she will be talking to us about the results of the GEM Guatemala report. Welcome, Monica.
Thank you, Aileen.
We also have Professor Mark Hart, who is emerging from a very volatile situation in the UK at the moment. He represents GEM UK. He is the Professor of Small Business and Entrepreneurship at Aston University, and he is, as you can see, a Deputy Director of the Centre for Enterprise. We also have Professor Jeff Shay, who is representing GEM USA, and he is the Professor of Entrepreneurship and the Executive Director for Academic Operations at the Blank School for Entrepreneurial Behaviour in Babson College. Now, could we just maybe go one slide backwards, Kevin? I just want to talk very briefly. Now, GEM every year produces a global report. And what we realized is that one of the things that we do, well, we profile that global report very highly at GEM Global. But one of the things that we thought would be really useful is to kind of to look at the national reports and to have an opportunity to compare, contrast, and really get a sense of the depth of GEM research and when it comes to the national level. And you also, hopefully today in this webinar, will get some perspectives of the use to which policymakers put the GEM results. And that is a very, very interesting aspect in GEM. And so we're going to launch this webinar by listening to GEM Guatemala first, and then a very, very different perspective. We swing over here to Europe. I'm actually in Switzerland, but we'll swing over to Europe to Mark and listen to the conclusions of the GEM UK report, and then we go back over to the USA to hear about the US results. So thank you very much, Monica. If we could start with you, thank you.
Thank you, Aileen, and thank you, Kevin. For me, it's a pleasure to be here today sharing these results. We have been doing the GEM research since 12 years ago, and we do it from the Kirchner Entrepreneurship Center, which was the first entrepreneurship center of the region. We do it from Universidad Francisco Marroquín. It is a private university that, since it was founded, it is always interested in many topics, but mainly to promote freedom, ideas, and also entrepreneurial action. So we are totally connected. In the next slide, we can share with you some of the results. And we wanted to show along the way, all these years that we have been doing the research, what are some of the results regarding the entrepreneurial process in Guatemala. I want to show you how high are the numbers of potential entrepreneurs and also early stage entrepreneurs. I think this is something interesting, especially in our country. So we know we are a country that are always struggling with development, but we see positive that there's a lot of entrepreneurial action, and we need to know how can we improve that entrepreneurial action. And just see the results between the last years. You can see that especially the early stage entrepreneurship has not been going down. It has grown, especially on the years of the pandemic. Next, we can see what are some of the social attitudes in Guatemala towards entrepreneurship. And I think this is very important and relevant. We want that entrepreneurs in the society feel proud about themselves and people really admires them and as heroes. So we have seen that since we started to do this research some years ago, we have been improving in the way society sees entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial action. In the last years, we have been in the first position or second position of the world regarding this respect and meaning entrepreneurship is a good career choice for people. And I think this is powerful. Of course, we have still to work a lot with media that have been improving, as you can see, but we still have to do some work on that. Next, we can see the results regarding the entrepreneurs, just showing three very specific data about the person. We have seen that entrepreneurial action is mainly concentrated in students. I mean, people that finishes their high school and they do not go to the university. Of course, those ones that grow fast are mostly those ones that have had university studies. But I think this is an interesting topic. The second thing is they're young. As you can see in the percentages, they are concentrated between 25 and 44 years old. That means that we have young entrepreneurs. And also in gender speaking, we have a little difference, a little higher men than women. So I think this is interesting to share. Next, we can see the characteristics of the businesses. This is very relevant. You can see the size of the businesses. They are very small. Most of them early stage, plus also the established entrepreneurs, they start more than 50%, start with less than 1.4 actually $1,000. So they're very small businesses and they're mainly concentrated on consumption, as you can see in the graphic. And one thing that is also a discussion here is the number of jobs they're generating. So for them, this is not a job just for the person. Normally, it's for the whole family. When we ask them if they're generating jobs, they do not count the family members because they feel they are part of the ownership part. So beside the family members, we see that there's a small number of job generation, which is also a concern. And we always discuss about this. It's powerful and we know it makes a difference. And finishing with the main results that we have found, in the next slide, we have the conclusions of these things that we have been seeing during the years. First of all, one thing is the cost and complexity of formality. We are normally asked themselves, what are the things that are holding you back? And this is what they say. I mean, the complexity is the formality is very complex and very costly. They also have difficulties to move their product from their own communities. So 80% of the products, they sell it in their own communities. There is insecurity. The cost for an entrepreneur of insecurity is almost similar to the original investment. So, I mean, they can even found another business during the year, the cost of paying for robbery or extortions or this. So this is important. We know that insecurity goes deeply hitting entrepreneurs. They're 1.5 more visible than regular persons regarding insecurity. Then we know that the formal economy does not open enough job opportunities for them. So that's why we have a lot of small businesses looking for food or whatever they need to do. Their business sophistication is not that good. I mean, we have very complex businesses and very good ones, but the percentage of that is very small in the city, so in the country. So we know that we need a lot of innovation, and that is why, and we finish with this, financial support is not easy to find for entrepreneurs in Guatemala. So having said this, this has been very interesting for me, sharing the results with you and now hearing others. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Monica. So yeah, sometimes some counterintuitive findings in that we have gone through quite a crisis, but we do find quite a buoyant, dynamic entrepreneurship landscape, which shows that Guatemalans are quite entrepreneurial overall, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I will be asking the other two speakers in a moment to perhaps comment, on what they have just heard. I also want to just say that what Monica has shown you, really these are kind of gold nuggets, or very just the particularly interesting findings. But in fact, GEM goes very deep. And Monica could probably go on all day about the different results that can be found. And the same is going to be, I can probably say the same about about what Mark is just going to present to you, and also Jeff. So over to you, Mark.
Thanks very much, Aileen, and thanks very much, Monica, for that whirlwind review of what's happening in Guatemala. I think there's some interesting touch points, but also some interesting departures, but we'll get on to that in the discussion. I don't have any slides, colleagues watching online. It's not because I'm lazy, it's because I've been talking about this project so many times that they're all locked into my head. So I think I can describe the key points in the UK. But before I do, I just want to set the scene. The UK was one of the founding national teams in the GEM Global Project back in the late 1990s. And we've got continuous data since then up until the 2022 survey, which has just been completed. So we've seen some turbulent times over those 20 odd years. We move from crisis to crisis, I think. But one of the watchwords I think I want to stress is that we have been talking quite a lot about the resilience of entrepreneurs and resilience of people on our national teams, irrespective of developed, emerging economies, etc., etc. So I think that's one of the watchwords that I would want to put out, is the resilience of individuals taking responsibility for their own financial independence. That's something that we've been talking about quite a lot in the GEM Global Project. We are sponsored by mostly government departments across the 4 nations of the UK. We don't talk about regions. I will upset my colleagues in the UK team if I talk about regions. We have a Northern Ireland team, we have a Scottish national team, and we've got a Welsh national team. It's one of the largest samples in the global project of at least 10,000 interviews every year. And we're very grateful to the sponsorship at the moment of the NatWest group of banks in the UK. So that's enough about the background. What did we find out in 21? Well, it was an interesting year. The pandemic was stuttering on. We had discussions about lockdown, we had discussions about the changing work practices, with all range of ways in which people were responding to the pandemic. But if I was to really summarize in 4 points, the key findings of the UK survey, it would be with the highest level of early stage entrepreneurship ever in the UK since we started in 1999. It was 12%, keeping the number simple, mostly by nascents. And this was following a fall in the 2020 survey. So what we saw was, even in the midst of the lockdowns of 2020 and in the sort of the eye of the storm of the pandemic, people were still looking to set up in business, but they were postponing their decisions. So what we picked up in 2021 survey was, in fact, that dam being burst, and we have the highest level of early stage entrepreneurial activity that we've ever seen. And again, the historical norm all the way through the early decade of the GEM UK project was about 6%. So now we're now into double digits. We like to compare ourselves with the US, but we'll get on to that discussion with Jeff shortly. But we're still very much lagging behind the US, but very much positioning ourselves in that mid-Atlantic position, somewhere between mainland Europe and the US in terms of where we see our early stage entrepreneurial activity. Before we left the European Union, we were certainly seen as the startup capital of the EU 28 countries, whereby about 20% of all startups in the EU 28 were in the UK. So there's a very strong entrepreneurial tradition. We also have seen a narrowing of the gap between female and male entrepreneurial activity. That's the second main point I want to stress. There has been a lot of discussion in the UK. One of the CEO of the NatWest Group, Alison Rose, launched a Rose Report before the pandemic 2018. We're highlighting the issue about women are half as likely as men to be setting up an early stage business. That gap is closed. It's now sitting at about 75%. And actually in Scotland this year, there's actually no difference whatsoever. So I think things are moving. I'm not saying that's all to do with Alison's work on the Rose Review, but it's actually brought forward the conversation in a number of organizations. The dialogue, the discourse in the UK has certainly changed. Huge problem with funding of female startup activities. So whilst the gap is closing in the headline, the nascence, when we look at where the funding is going, it's an absolute disgrace, in my view, the very small proportion of venture capital, for example, that goes to women-led businesses, especially at the startup stage. There's a wonderful statistic which I have picked up from the British Business Bank here in the UK, which is to say that 1 pence in every pound, which is probably the same as 1 cent in every dollar in terms of exchange rates at the moment, goes to women-led businesses in terms of venture capital. So that's an issue in that respect. We also have seen in the UK the continuing resilience of our ethnic and immigrant members of the population in terms of their higher levels of entrepreneurial activity compared to a white indigenous, lived here all their lives, non-migrant group. And again, that's something which we've picked up in the last years. It's strengthened throughout the pandemic, which is very interesting. And also we have an age perspective as well, which is the final point I want to make on the headline results, whereby we see an older group of entrepreneurs coming forward now. And I think that's again to do with the pandemic, the shaking out of the labour market in terms of people reevaluating their position in the labour market as a result of the pandemic. So that's something that's very strong. Very quickly, in terms of the expert survey, the UK still has major problems here about R&D, about cultural and societal norms, but particularly in the infrastructure of R&D and the commercialization of science, especially from our university setup. We are very good in government programs. We keep saying, what can the government do for us? Which is something I don't think, Jeff, from a US perspective, is something you hear very much about. But here in the UK, it's a time-honoured profession. What can the government do to encourage more entrepreneurship? Well, actually, that I think is the wrong question, but we can come on to that. And finally, Aileen and colleagues, we are doing there's a very active research program in the using the UK data, and we've just had a paper accepted in Small Business Economics on growth ambition, comparing female and men nascent entrepreneurs. We've done some time series analysis on that, pre-financial crisis, post-financial crisis, comparing it to the European data as well. And we have a very interesting story about the deviant men who overemphasize their growth ambitions, and that is the root cause of some of the differences we observe by gender. And finally, a little project to say regional variations in entrepreneurship can somehow be related to social capital. So we're looking at an area-based analysis and all of that. So that gives you a very clear overview of the UK work, the UK report for 21. We've just finished our survey work for 2022. So watch this space and see how these trends are continuing into as the decade of the 20s continues. Thank you very much, Aileen.
Thank you so much, Mark. Very interesting. I'll come back to one or two of the things you said. But I'm going to immediately go over to Jeff back over to the United States of America. And over to you, Jeff. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mark and Monica. You set a high bar for me with all of your data. As most of you probably know, Babson is one of the founding members of GEM, and it's a real honor to be here. My mentor in my undergraduate and MBA program was Bill Bygrave, who was one of the founders of GEM, and so it's kind of surreal to be sitting here and talking about research that was started so many years ago by my mentor. But it is great to be here. I do have to say too, Aileen, you pointed this out, and the other, Monica and Mark have also mentioned, the reality is these reports, I for any of you that are watching this for the first time, I highly recommend you take a look at these reports. These reports are so rich. Like as a professor, I could literally take like a few of the paragraphs from any one of the reports, and certainly as a professor, I could probably talk about it for 2 or 3 hours, and I could engage in great discussions. And I really encourage you also to get the word out and spread the GEM name out to policymakers, because I think this data is very important for them to look at, to explore, and to take into consideration when they're trying to come up with policies that fuel entrepreneurship in various countries around the world. So I'll start off the TEA, as one would expect. We rebounded from 2020 in 2021, almost to our historic level, that we set back in 2019. And this translates to about 33.5 million people starting or running businesses. Now, some might think that that's a really high number, but if you think of anybody who's starting a business, a side hustle, whatever it might be, those are included in these numbers. Established business owners declined slightly, 8.8, which translates to about 18 million people. And the closure rate remained at near record levels. And the records were set in 2007, 2008, when we had the global financial crisis, and then, again, kind of, jumped back up, spiked back up due to the pandemic. These are, these numbers here are kind of what you would expect. And the reason that our team, when we discussed, why the closures might have remained the same, despite the fact that we started coming out of the pandemic, is the fact that you do see some type of lag effect in the businesses that were impacted by the pandemic. In that we did, in the United States, we had programs, government programs that did help kind of keep these businesses afloat. But eventually they had to face the reality of kind of the new reality of what our economy was, and the economy in the US, continues to struggle quite a bit with high inflation, as other countries are experiencing around the world, supply chain issues. The next thing that I would like to talk about is, the impact of COVID, just some of the numbers here and I know people are probably tired about hearing about COVID, but I think it's important from an entrepreneur's perspective to understand, what did COVID do? So in terms of the difficulty of starting a new business, one thing that we did notice, the difference between 2020 and 2021 is that it started to go down. So in 2020, the respondents indicated that they said it was much more difficult. 82% of them said it was much more difficult than in 2019 to start a business, which is what you would expect. But it's nice to see the trend moving in a positive way, in that 35% this time said that it was, that there was difficulty starting a business versus in 2020. Some of the reason why there might be still high there is the fact that you do have residual impacts of COVID-19, and that some of the money has started to run out in terms of funding starting some business. COVID-19 continues to provide more opportunities for businesses out there. That's remained stable in the US. And another positive sign for looking forward was that in 2021, 43% had higher growth expectations than they did the year prior. But there's still almost a third that said the expectations for growth were lower. So perhaps that's some trepidation on the part of the respondents in terms of still not knowing what's coming in the future. And I think it's important for everybody to remember that this data that we're talking about, that these national reports are based on, are from 2021. The data was gathered between June and July of that year. And so that was still a period of kind of unknown for many people. Next, I'd like to just talk about one of the anomalies that we found, which is very interesting and certainly bodes well for for an academic institution like Babson. And that is that we saw a surge this year, up to 19% of the 18 to 24 year old group that they're involved with entrepreneurship. So they're starting a business or already running a new business. That's pretty exciting jump, given that that group are the ones that might be in school at Babson or one of the other colleges around the world that are teaching entrepreneurship, and that entrepreneurship is becoming, more and more a potential career path, as Monica noted before. 20% of the students have entrepreneurial, or this younger group have entrepreneurial intentions. One of the reasons we think for that is that the U.S. as a culture continues to be enamored by the success, by the success of entrepreneurs, and it continues to be in the media and social media, and you see people out there that are wildly successful, and so you start to think, maybe I'm capable of doing that. So someday I would like to have my own business. Now, one other part that on the negative side is that they have high closure rates, higher than the other sets of ages, and that's 6.2%. One of the reasons for this is that, for example, if you're in the 18 to 24-year-old group, perhaps you don't have a mortgage, car payments, other things like that right then. So it is actually easier to close a business when you're younger because you don't have some of those commitments, whereas older age groups might hang on to their business longer, which may or may not be a good thing, but it's certainly something to look at. Next. When we look at gender and entrepreneurship, and I know Jem has done a wonderful job globally with the women's reports, and one of the things that's great about it is I think by exposing the numbers and doing rigorous research is that we start to make the world more aware of some of the challenges and, some of the ways that we make an impact. And if we look in the US, at least, we're starting to close some of these gaps. So opportunity perceptions are now much closer than they've ever been in the historical data. Entrepreneurial intentions are nearly equal between male and females at about 14 and 15%. Fear of failure is actually the males actually climbed and the women started to decline. One of the reasons why we thought that this might be the case is that with the pandemic, more people were running businesses out of their home, and there were different ways that we even, perceived businesses. And so you could see that some of these changes might be because you see that there's opportunities and you could actually run your business out of the home, and there's much more flexibility, whereas some of the traditional gender roles, from the past might have had people thinking I could never run a business because I would like to start a family and be in a traditional role. Now people are seeing that, you can have it all. You can run a business and be at home and be successful. There are some gaps that still exist, though. The gaps that still exist are the ease of starting businesses. Women and men differ by about 11 points, and the capabilities perception is about 9 points. So when we look at this, we look at that this is a clear sign for a need for entrepreneurship education that is focused particularly on educating women on the possibilities and giving them the confidence that they can have through programs. So for example, at Babson, we have the Center for Women's Entrepreneurial Leadership, which provides some great programs, for women from around the world to learn about entrepreneurship, increase their confidence, and to increase, even things like their perceptions on the ease of starting a business. And I think that these gaps will continue to close, but this is great to see, based on the efforts of programs around the world. Next. The next one is when we look at race, one of the one group that really stands out is Black entrepreneurs in the United States. They have the highest intentions. They have the highest total entrepreneurship activities, and they're moving in a positive direction in terms of both business ownership and reduced closures. So if you look at the table on the bottom, for example, although the closures are still higher, than white entrepreneurs, it is moving in a positive direction. There were, fewer closures by 0.7%. But when you look at this, I mean, it's pretty amazing in terms of the opportunities and the perceived opportunities and intentions and everything for Black entrepreneurs in America. For example, for intentions, they're more than 2 times greater intentions than whites and higher than Hispanics. And then if we look at total entrepreneurship activity, it's 2.5 times that of white, and it's almost 2 times that of the Hispanic population. So I think these are all some great things that do come out and are very helpful in terms of having us understand various issues, when it comes to race and gender and youth entrepreneurship. And, this data will help us make arguments to make policy, that spreads entrepreneurship, not only in the United States, but across the globe. And I think that's it. I'm trying to remember. Yes, that is it.
That's the final slide, correct?
Yes.
Thank you very, very much, Jeff. Also very intriguing. I'm actually going to do a little round amongst our panelists, starting perhaps with Monica, who spoke first. But as you listened to Mark and Jeff, is there anything that kind of occurred to you, anything intriguing, surprising, or that you would like to ask a question about as regards the findings of the 2 other speakers?
Thank you, Aileen.
I'm sorry, before you answer, I just better say, because I can see that there's somebody with their hand up, Penny. Actually, Penny, if you don't mind putting your question in the Q&A, and please, everybody who's listening who has a question, please feel free to put your question on the Q&A, and our speakers will either reply directly, or we can actually, bring it to the fore in the discussion. Thank you. Yes, go ahead, Monica, sorry.
I think it was very interesting to see that all of us has this same behavior during pandemia that was increasing the early stage entrepreneurship and in a way contracting a bit the established entrepreneurship, which is not a surprise, but I think it's interesting to see. Mm-hmm. And I was surprised about the difference on the age group. As we heard Mark, he said it was older. I mean, they can see more presence of older entrepreneurs, and I think I got this. And Jeff said younger. I mean, this tendency or trend that it was increasing the younger presence on entrepreneurship, which I think it's interesting. Maybe it's related with the age of the population. We don't know, but I think it's interesting to know. And I would like to ask if during these years, 2021 and 2022, well, 2020 and 2021 actually, do you see predominance of some type of businesses, specifically in both countries? Since you have been looking around of these new businesses, is there a predominance of certain type of businesses? Are they mainly services? Are they consumption? Basic type of transformation? I don't know. I'm intrigued about that.
Okay, who would like to take that first, Jeff or Mark?
Can I just clarify the age issue? What we've seen is a doubling of the early stage entrepreneurs over the age of 55. So it's a doubling, but it's still true to say there's the propensity of young people still very much is moving into nascent and obviously signaling intention. So there's still a youthful element to it, but all I'm saying is that it's changing. And changed very dramatically between 20 and 21. So it's just a question of what happened in the labour market. It could well be there's wider economic influence as well, which forced the pandemic to have an influence on those older workers to actually review exactly what their expectations are. So there's a societal and an economy context, I guess. But just to clarify that. It's still a young people's game overall, but all I'm saying is there's a doubling of the older entrepreneurs, which is something we haven't seen before.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mark, for clarifying.
No, and I think that I think that it was interesting for us to see that to see that younger population increase. we have some interesting dynamics going on in the United States right now where we have a labor shortage, right? And so we have more jobs than people can choose from. And we have, a population, for example, that went through that period where many of them, if they did have jobs in that age, right? And if they were, like you mentioned, Monica, college educated, tends to predominate in terms of, people starting businesses. But if you had a professional job, for example, if you were working on Wall Street, you were able to actually work from home. And I'm not saying that all these people at those companies were starting up businesses, but I think that they felt more freedom to look at and explore those type of opportunities. And I think for the younger people, especially, like I remember my father worked for a utilities company, and he said, I might not get the highest salary, but I have security. People are always going to need to turn the lights on. But for the younger population, with the pandemic and the uncertainty that created, I think that for a lot of them, they might have turned to entrepreneurship as a way to say, hey, I better take control of my own future and my own destiny. And it becomes more, even more interesting. In terms of the sectors, the one that's surprising that came out in the GEM USA report is the fact that the USA, that's, many of us consider it to be, like one of the technology leaders, because there are, many of the big global companies, technology leaders, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, so on, do come from there. What was surprising, though, is the fact that the businesses that people were starting and that the respondents are in, they tend to be, I'm looking at a chart right now, they tend to be in wholesale and retail is the largest percent, 23%. They tend to be in manufacturing and transportation, and then health, education, government, and social services. So the technology, you would think that every entrepreneur, that a greater proportion of them would be starting like pure kind of technology. So information and communication technology was only 5%, right? So 3 times as many are doing these things. And it's interesting because we have television shows like called Dirty Jobs and things like that, where they highlight the fact that you can still earn a great living by going into some of these less sexy industries. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs have seen that, and they've seen those as opportunities, and that's why they're starting in those sectors.
I mean,
do you think also, Jeff, I'm building on that, do you think also that some entrepreneurs at least are seeing opportunities in terms of creating maybe more sustainable businesses in certain areas, like, for example, food?
Oh yeah, and certainly there are rapid expansion in those areas, and especially sustainability, healthy food, those things are, there's so many companies starting every day in the United States. It's almost like, exactly. I would say that craze in the United States in terms of sustainability, healthy foods, healthy life, that is very similar to the early 2000s with like web companies, where we just saw that big surge, and then eventually there'll be some sort of a shakeout, but they are creating a new space.
Right. Mark, you wanted to comment?
No, I was just going to add to the comment about sector. I think I would concur with what Jeff is saying. It's sectors, and they're not the sexy sectors that many folk from a policy perspective would want to embrace. I do a lot of research on some of the fastest growing businesses in the UK, apart from the GEM survey, and it's clear to me that some of the fastest growing companies are in recycling, waste management, fish processing. Well, until we left the EU, that was a bit of a problem with the fish industry at the moment. But waste management and recycling, that it tells you there's the old expression here in the UK, where there's muck, there's brass. In terms of cash, and it's sometimes a bit counterintuitive. Yeah. It's not all the sexy high-tech health sciences, biosciences, which is a crucial area. But I think what we're seeing in terms of a lot of our nascents in the GEM project is easy to reach businesses, some of which are flexible now post-pandemic in terms of working from home. A lot of people moving into e-commerce, for example. And on the back of e-commerce, large conglomerates can grow. One of our biggest companies here in the UK is Gymshark, which is an Aston graduate. I have to say, dropped out and didn't finish his degree. We gave him a doctorate last summer, by the way. Gymshark has built a huge e-commerce from his bedroom. And that's just an example of what young people do. And, it's become more easy and flexible with a lot of the digital technologies that are available to run a large business online very quickly.
Well, after all, Bill Gates did create Microsoft from his garage, it's everything.
Ben was his bedroom. I think he did go to a garage eventually, but he must have been following that Jordan route.
There's just one other question that I have on my side. I think it's really encouraging to see women becoming more robust in the entrepreneurship environment. And we saw from the women's report that women actually do tend to make different choices to men in terms of the kinds of businesses that they create. And so I wonder, does that contribute, as women emerge into the entrepreneurship environment, does that contribute to these, consolidation of entrepreneurship in sectors such as, the less sexy sectors, as you say, so that's one possibility.
Can I make 2 points on that, Aileen, about female entrepreneurship? But we need to be very careful how we define growth in the context of our discussions about entrepreneurship. Growth has many definitions and meanings to particular individuals, and in particular when we compare men with women, and our paper is going to demonstrate that. But there's also an attitude to risk which is different as well. And I think that's really quite important to understand the attitudes to risk, the cautious approach perhaps, and also the motivations. I mean, a lot of research here in the UK using GEM data shows that women are just as likely as men to be setting up social enterprises at the level of the community. There's no difference whatsoever, and that's historically been the case for many years. Okay. So again, these are the nuances that we need to understand before we get into this sort of cliched discussion about female entrepreneurship that I hear in policy circles, not in the GEM community. I will quickly add. Sorry for putting that in.
No, great.
I just wanted to mention something short about women entrepreneurship. This is a whole thing that we can research definitely, and we have to be careful that we have seen in countries like Guatemala, it is very similar, the number of entrepreneurs in women and men. We have a little difference, and one of the reasons is because they know that if they go through entrepreneurship, they can generate income to their household. But in another research that we did, and this is very interesting, normally they use that money to raise their kids with education. So in some of these countries that are developing countries, they know they struggle with this thing of getting the kids into jobs or going to study. Yeah. So for them, this is a thing of, I will put the money, I'm an entrepreneur, I have the money, I pay for them to go to school or for their, materials or whatever. So I think this is powerful and very interesting. And I know we can talk about this for the whole day, but I know you have
this is over like really a long-lasting impact on the economy overall, right? When people are coming into the job market trained and educated. I as you know, and you've all mentioned, you've mentioned the kinds of sponsors that we have. Mark, in particular, you've pointed to the governmental departments that support the work of GEM. I mean, across the board in GEM, this year we have about 50 countries participating in our research. Many of them are actually sponsored by governments, most of them, in fact. So I have a question, again, perhaps, I'll start with you, Jeff. To what extent is GEM having an impact on the policymaker, and how do you see that reflected? Is it something that's discernible that can you maybe just comment on your relationship with policymakers?
Yeah, I know that in the past, I don't know what the year was. I want to say that it was like 5 years ago, that Donna Kelly, who's been one of the team leaders for years, was asked to go down to Washington, D.C. and did present on the GEM data and kind of things like that. I would say that, honestly, one of the things that was surprising, and I know I shared it with you and others, is that this year we made a really strong effort to reach out to various constituent groups that are associated or are part of the US government.
Mhm.
And we were surprised that we, for example, we sent out probably 200 emails and we got 7 responses from various groups. We're trying to figure out other ways. I think the big part is we need to get the data in the hands of the policymakers. Right now, that's not necessarily occurring as much as I would like it to be, right?
Yeah.
Because you do have GEM data, right? They could really help make policy, and it's not being used. There's just people that are surmising. I think this is what's going on.
Because, for example, those figures on race, that must be of extreme interest to certain government departments. The figures on the entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we're breaking it down to different groups. I mean, if you want to make the argument for, like, if I'm a policymaker and I want to make an argument for more money for my, diverse city or state, or if I want to based on gender, I mean, why wouldn't I be using that? So I'm a bit surprised, but we're continuing to work on it. Yeah,
I mean, these are things. I mean, GEM has, there's always ways to go, but I think also GEM does give a story. It's a kind of storytelling is quite interesting, and we can provide that story through our data. Mark, could you comment on the same question? I mean, obviously there's the delicate subject of Brexit and its impact on entrepreneurship and
yes. I mean, there's been a number of sort of upheavals in the UK, which over and above everything else is happening in every other country on the earth. Our data is used as tracker data metrics in Scottish government, Welsh government, UK government, and Northern Ireland government. So our metrics are used. Sometimes we're not quite sure what they're used to do, but I know that our work on ethnicity and gender is very much at the core of government. Last year, we launched our report with the Small Business Minister, Paul Scully, at the time. For some reasons best known to someone up there, we do no longer have a Small Business Minister in the UK, but that's just the state of play. But the point is that they take an interest and they look at it and they seek to understand, and the officials in the range of departments, so they sponsor the survey, make a contribution, but we have discussions all the time with the officials about how that impacts on policy, gender and ethnicity in particular, and immigration. I've had many discussions with government representatives here in Whitehall about the importance of immigration to entrepreneurs, which you can imagine in the UK context after Brexit goes down like a lead balloon. But nevertheless, there's active engagement. We talk about mobility as being an important consideration following the Richard Florida work of many decades on the impact of mobile individuals, educated individuals. So there's a great deal of interest here. And, and I think it has begun to influence the way certain discussions are developed about aspects of entrepreneurship. And also we've put under an audit by the government to show that, or by the ONS, that we are the only non-governmental survey with ONS approval in the UK. Which I think is, they came and looked at the methodology and everything else, and although we complain about the methodology sometimes and have angst about it, it is seen as a very robust survey. So that again gives it credibility in government. So we've got good traction. Do I see policy statements emanating every quarter? No. But I know it informs discussions and it is referred to regularly. And I'm actually hosting a dinner in Parliament in early December, gathering MPs from all corners of the political spectrum, and ministers, if there's any around, if they haven't all moved on to do other things by that stage. And indeed, if there's not an election, which may be something which will interrupt my dinner, but we do our best. Like Jeff, I send out hundreds of emails and you sometimes wonder where they end up, but there's a bit of traction. And the fact is that the four nation governments, they use the metric and they want us to sort of develop a narrative over 20 years now.
Mhm.
Okay, I just want to say, I mean, I've not seen any questions from the audience there. It's your last chance,
Aileen,
but I will ask Monica a question, the same question just there. I know that you wanted to say something, but I just wanted to remind the audience that they can ask one or two questions. There's still a little bit of time, but very little. But go ahead, Monica. Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to share because here's an advantage of being a small country. And we do have a lot of influence in the media and with policymakers in Guatemala through GEM. When we do the national report, we are very visible in media, and along all the year, what we do, the team is always presenting the results and discussing the results with different groups. So we really have this like route through the year to discuss it, and we have moved forward in many different ways. For example, GEM is an indicator and a reference for good results of some decision making in the economics ministry department in Guatemala. And it aroused a policy regarding or related with entrepreneurship, and also a law that is related with entrepreneurship. We have the opportunity to discuss some of the points of this law and suggest some changes, not all of what we thought, but some, and I think that's positive. And one of the main purposes of the university, since we promote freedom, is to increase the freedom of action for entrepreneurs. So that's why for us, it's so important, this point of view of GEM, that is, what is holding you back? We want to read the answers of our entrepreneurs and to make this visible as much as we can, so we can increase the possibility for entrepreneurs to act more freely and to move forward in a better way. And one of the points we're pushing as much as we can is to reduce cost and complexity of formality. We know that's something very important to be done, and we hope we can move it forward in the next year. So I think that's a very important point in Guatemala. Everybody uses GEM as the references regarding to entrepreneurial activity.
Right, thank you very much, Monica. I'm still not seeing any questions there. I think we'll actually move to wrap up very quickly. Actually, from what you have just been saying to me, it seems to me that the nexus between the entrepreneur, the policymaker, and GEM has a great scope for further development, and that countries are at a different stage in that respect. And if we looked at the remaining other 47 plus countries that work with us, each one will be in a different interface with policymakers. But I think this is an area where in GEM we can really, really make a difference in raising awareness, and perhaps then after awareness is raised, there's then interest, and then after that innovation, and that's how innovation takes place: awareness to interest to innovation. And I'd just like to thank you very much, Jeff, Mark, Monica, for coming along today and giving of your precious time. As you can see, we've put up there some ways in which you can collaborate with GEM. Just connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, etc. You can visit our website. You can contact us by email. Why would you contact us by email? Well, if you're sitting out there and you might potentially be a potential leader of a national team or can put a national team together, that's one way. But we're also always looking for sponsors of reports and sponsors of GEM itself. Well, we very much look forward to hearing from you, but thank you very, very much to our speakers today.